Trump versus the Pope, the hidden crisis that could cost Republicans Congress. A rare clash between Donald Trump and Pope Leo XIV could unsettle America's conservative coalition, just as Washington moves deeper into war in the Middle East. What happens when a U.S. president goes to war, and the Pope publicly pushes back? That's exactly what's happening right now between Donald Trump and Pope Leo XIV. It looks like a symbolic disagreement over the Iran conflict, but this clash could reshape America's political landscape, and even threaten Republican control of Congress. Here's why. In modern American politics, few things have seemed as stable as the alliance between the Republican Party and religious voters. Yet history sometimes advances through subtle paradoxes. A nationalist president can end up weakening the very moral coalition that helped return him to power. The public confrontation between Donald Trump and Pope Leo XIV over the war with Iran may prove to be one such moment, not because it is at once decisive, but because it could become decisive over time. Washington is accustomed to disagreements between presidents and the Vatican. But a U.S. president criticizing a pope in explicitly domestic political language, branding him insufficiently MAGA, is without precedent. That is not merely a sharp remark. It is a sign of something deeper: American politics colliding directly with transnational moral authority. If the Iran war is a military front, the dispute with the Vatican may become a domestic political one. When a Middle Eastern war enters America's moral landscape, in modern history, the Vatican rarely stays silent in the face of regional war. From Iraq in 2003 to Ukraine in 2022, the Holy See has consistently positioned itself as a voice for mediation. Pope Leo XIV's call to halt the Iran conflict was therefore institutionally predictable. What was less predictable was the White House response. Donald Trump did not merely reject the Vatican's position. He personalized the dispute. By saying the Pope lacked the spirit of MAGA, he transformed a policy disagreement into a clash of identities. And in American politics, identity conflicts are always more dangerous than policy disputes. In wartime, presidents must control the moral narrative of the conflict. A global religious leader can disrupt that narrative. Trump's reaction thus had strategic logic. He could not allow the Vatican to define the ethical legitimacy of the war, but strategic logic does not always align with electoral logic. A small but decisive voting bloc. American Catholics are not the largest religious voting bloc, but they are the most fluid. While conservative Protestants overwhelmingly support Republicans, and secular liberals reliably support Democrats, Catholic voters often decide outcomes in battleground states. In 2024, Donald Trump won 55% of the Catholic vote, enough to secure advantages in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Arizona. No other religious group plays such a bridging role between America's political camps. That is why criticizing a pope is not like criticizing a senator or a journalist. It resembles confronting a moral symbol for part of one's own electoral base. In politics, symbols often outweigh statistics. A clash between two forms of power, the Trump-Leo XIV confrontation, is not theological. It is geopolitical in nature, a dispute between two competing models of global authority. On one side stands sovereignty-first realism: international order must serve national interests. On the other hand, moral universalism: war must be judged by humanitarian standards. Donald Trump speaks about security. The Vatican speaks about peace. Trump speaks about Iran. The Vatican speaks about people. This divergence is not new. What is new is that it has become a personal confrontation between a U.S. president and a pope, one image, and an invisible boundary. The controversy did not stop at rhetoric. A social media image portraying Trump in strongly religious symbolic terms triggered discomfort even among religious conservatives who otherwise support him. That reaction revealed something uncomfortable for the White House. The MAGA coalition is not perfectly unified. It includes nationalists, cultural conservatives, and traditional believers. These groups usually move together, but not always. A religious symbol used at the wrong moment can expose the cracks. The Vatican was not speaking only to Washington. A common analytical mistake in the United States is to assume the Vatican was addressing America. The Vatican was addressing the world. When the Pope criticized the Iran war, the message was heard in Latin America, Africa. The the Middle East, Asia, regions where Catholicism is expanding faster than in Europe, the Vatican is not a military power. But it is a moral superpower. And in an age of information warfare, moral authority can shape strategic legitimacy. That is what made the White House respond: a tactical error, or a calculated strategy. It is entirely possible that Trump understood the risks of criticizing the Pope, and accepted them anyway. Conflict has long been a mobilizing instrument in Trump's political method. A confrontation with the Vatican may reinforce his image as a leader unwilling to compromise with global elites, a familiar frame within the MAGA narrative, yet that strategy has limits. The Vatican is not the United Nations. The Pope is not a diplomatic bureaucrat. Confronting him can be interpreted as confronting faith rather than policy. That is a consequential difference, when external war creates internal risk. If the Iran war ends quickly, the Trump-Leo XIV dispute may fade into memory. But if the war continues, the Vatican will keep speaking, and each intervention will extend the political life of this confrontation. In that scenario, the White House could face an unfamiliar kind of challenge: opposition from an actor without an army, without a defense budget, but with 1.4 billion followers, in modern politics, which is a distinctive kind of power, a test for the MAGA coalition. The coalition that returned Donald Trump to the presidency is not monolithic. It is a convergence of economic nationalism, cultural conservatism, religious traditionalism. In peacetime, these elements reinforce one another. In wartime, they can diverge. The Iran conflict turns foreign policy into a moral question. And when policy becomes moral, the Vatican always has a voice. The question is not whether Trump can win an argument with the Pope. The question is whether he needs to. A dispute not yet over. American presidents have disagreed with popes before. But rarely have they transformed disagreement into a public personal confrontation. What makes this episode notable is not the harshness of rhetoric. It is the timing. Amid a Middle Eastern war, ahead of midterm elections, and inside a United States more polarized than at any time in decades, sometimes symbolic disputes carry real consequences. And sometimes words directed toward Rome echo loudly in Pennsylvania. If the Iran war continues, the clash between the White House and the Vatican may become more than a communications incident. It may become a political fault line, and in American politics, such fault lines rarely disappear on their own.